All right, hey, Fin Gang, hope you had a fantastic start to your week. Today, we are waiting for me to get set up because I got home a little late because my coworkers dared to arrive on time. I set up early. How dare they mildly inconvenience me? Okay. Get my glasses on. My glasses. I'm having a good day. Good start to the week. Switch the music to the creepy vampire music. Courtesy of Ivan Dutch. Switch us over to the book. Okay. What the hell happened last time? Because it's been a few days. What happened then? They were having a meeting. Reconvening at Dr. Seward's home / asylum to have a squad meeting about what to do with Dracula. Yo boy. The Dracula kind of crashed the meeting, but Quincy shot at the bat and made him fuck off rudely. They concluded that Mina's not going to be a part of the squad going forward to protect her because they're such gentlemen, because this was written in the 19th century. Yeah, that was pretty much what happened last time. Last chapter's sake, I think the last time we read a couple chapters. And I subsequently mind dumped almost everything between all the games I played since then. I had a busy weekend. I think that's the most I've streamed. No, wait. The birthday stream ran for like almost 12 full hours. So I probably streamed more that weekend altogether. But this one got close. I had a good weekend. In case you missed it, Thursday, because I took some days off last week after working last weekend. Thursday, I had my first Phasmophobia play session and collab with Dalzisa and Ariel. The read Dracula on Thursday night. Also, Friday, I think that was the day I played Phasmo with Captain, Jez, and Saki, I think? I forget. Also Demonologist. And then I did Helldivers, and then I had a Power Wash collab yesterday. I think that was everything I did since last week. Yeah. Anyways, enough rambling about that. Let us get started with Dracula by Bram Stoker, chapter 19. Starting with Jonathan Harker's journal as I get my throat lozenge, because I forgot. Okay. The 1st of October, 5 a.m. What was the date of the previous entry? Good check. Okay, so it's later that day, an hour later after the meeting. I went with the party to search with an easy mind, for I think I never saw Mina so absolutely strong and well. I am so glad that she consented to hold back and let us men do the work. 19th century. Somehow, it was a dread to me that she was in this fearful business at all. But now that her work is done, and that it is due to her energy and brains and foresight that the whole story is put together in such a way that every point tells. That's right, that's what happened last time. Mina was compiling all of the journals from the disparate people into one cohesive narrative. And I'm pretty sure the twist is going to be that the book we're reading is actually Mina's compilation of notes. She may well feel that her part is finished, and that she can henceforth leave the rest to us. We were, I think, all a little upset by the scene with Mr. Renfield. When we came away from his room, we were silent till we got back to the study. Then, Mr. Morris said to Dr. Seward, Renfield, that was right, at the end of the last chapter, Renfield had the squad meet with him, and then he foreshadowed that he's gonna do a murder, probably. I'm assuming something's gonna happen to Mina and or Dracula inside the asylum while the squad is gone. Mr. Morse, said Dr. Seward. Say, Jack, if that man wasn't attempting a bluff, he is about the sanest lunatic I ever saw. I'm not sure, but I believe that he had some serious purpose. And if he had, it was pretty rough on him not to get a chance. Lord Godalming, Arthur, and I were silent, but Dr. Van Helsing added, Friend John, You know more of lunatics than I do, and I'm glad of it, for I fear that if it had been to me to decide, I would, before that last hysterical outburst, have given him free. But we live and learn, and in our present task, we must take no chance. As my friend Quincy would say, all is best as they are. Dr. Seward seemed to answer them both in a dreaming kind of way. I don't know but that I agree with you. If that man had been an ordinary lunatic, I would have taken my chance of trusting him. But he seems so mixed up with the Count in an indexy kind of way. What the hell does that mean? That I am afraid of doing anything wrong by helping his fads. I can't forget how he prayed with almost equal fervor for a cat, then tried to tear my throat out with his teeth. Oh, it's Dr. Seward speaking, not Arthur. Besides, he called the Count Lord and Master, and you may want to get out to help him in some diabolic way. That horrid thing has the wolves and the rats in his own kind to help him, so I suppose he isn't above trying to use a respectable lunatic. He almost certainly did seem earnest, though. I only hope we have done what is best. These things, in conjunction with the wild work we have in hand, help to unnerve a man. The professor stepped over and, laying his hand on his shoulder, said in his grave, kindly way. Still wondering what indexy means. Friend John, have no fear. We are trying to do our duty in a very sad and terrible case. We can only do as we deem best. What else have we to hope for except the pity of a good God? Lord Godalming had slipped away for a few minutes, but now he returned. He held up a little silver whistle as he remarked, "That old place may be full of rats, and if so, I've got an antidote on call." Having passed the wall, we took our way to the trees, taking care to keep in the shadows of the trees on the lawn when the moonlight shone out. When we got to the porch, the professor opened his bag and took out a lot of things, which he laid on the step, sorting them into 4 little groups, evidently one for each. Then he spoke. "My friends, we are going into a terrible danger, and we need arms of many kinds. Our enemy is not merely spiritual. Remember that he has the strength of 20 men, and that, though our necks or our windpipes are of a common kind, are therefore breakable or crushable. His are not, amenable to mere strength. A stronger man, or a body of men more strong in all than him." I always forget that Helsing talks like this. "Can at certain times hold him, but they cannot hurt him as we can be hurt by him. We must, therefore, guard ourselves from his touch. Keep this near your heart." As he spoke, he lifted a little silver crucifix and held it out to me, I being nearest to him. "Put these flowers around your neck." Here, he handed to me a wreath of withered garlic blossoms. "For other enemies more mundane, this revolver and this knife, and for aid in all, these so small electric lamps, which you can fasten to your breast. And for all, and above all, at the last, this, which we must not desecrate needless." This was a portion of sacred wafer, which he put in an envelope and handed to me. Each of the others was similarly equipped. "Now," he said, "Friend John, where are the skeleton keys? If so, that we can open the door, we need not break house by the window, as before at Miss Lucy's." Dr. Seward, excuse me. Dr. Seward tried 1 or 2 skeleton keys, his mechanical dexterity as a surgeon standing him in good stead. Presently, he got one to suit. After a little play back and forward, the bolt yielded and, with a rusty clang, shot back. We pressed on the door, the rusty hinges creaked, and it slowly opened. It was startlingly like the image conveyed to me in Dr. Seward's diary of the opening of Miss Westenra's tomb. That was Lucy, who Dracula turned into a vampiress, who they just slayed a day or two before this. I fancy that the same idea seemed to strike the others, for with one accord they shrank back. The professor was the first to move forward and stepped into the open door. "In manus tas domine," he said, crossing himself as he passed over the threshold. We closed the door behind us, lest, when we should have lit our lamps, we should possibly attract attention from the road. The professor carefully tried the lock, lest we might not be able to open it from within, should we be in a hurry making our exit. Then we all lit our lamps and proceeded on our search. One moment, y'all. I forgot I need to open a page. Just 1 second. And load faster. Load faster. There we go. Okay, there we go. The light from the tiny lamps fell in all sorts of odd forms, as the rays crossed each other, or the opacity of our bodies threw great shadows. I could not for my life get away from the feeling that there was someone else amongst us. Among us. I suppose it was the recollection, so powerfully brought home to me by the grim surroundings, of that terrible experience in Transylvania. I think the feeling was common to us all, for I noticed that the others kept looking over their shoulders at every sound and every new shadow, just as I felt myself doing. The whole place was thick with dust. The floor was seemingly inches deep, except for recent footsteps, in which, on holding down my lamp, I could see the marks of hobnails where the dust was cracked. The walls were fluffy and heavy with dust, and in the corners were masses of spider webs, whereon the dust had gathered till they looked like the tattered rags as the weight had torn them partially down. On a table in the hall was a great bunch of keys with a time-yellowed label on each. They had been used several times, for on the table were several similar rents in the blanket of dust, similar to what that exposed when the professor lifted them. He turned to me and said, "You know this place, Jonathan. You have copied maps of it, and you know it at least more than we do. Which is the way to the chapel?" I had an idea of its direction, though on my former visit I had not been able to get admission to it. So I led the way, and after a few wrong turnings found myself opposite a low, arched, oaken door, ribbed with iron bands. "This is the spot," said the professor as he turned his lamp on a small map of the house, copied from the file of my original correspondence regarding the purchase. With a little trouble, we found the key on the bunch and opened the door. We were prepared for some unpleasantness, for as we were opening the door, a faint, malodorous air seemed to exhale through the gaps, but none of us ever expected such an odor as we encountered. Hey enjoyer, hope you're doing great. Today we are continuing to read Dracula. This is my normal streaming time during the week, because I just got home from work, so I streamed for an hour before going to bed. Where was I? Countered. None of the others had met the Count at all in close quarters, and when I had seen him, who was either in the fasting stage of his existence, in his rooms, or when he was gloated with fresh blood and a ruined building opened the air. But here, the place was small and close, and the long disuse had made the air stagnant and foul. There was an earthly smell, as of some dry miasma, which came through the fouler air. But as to the odor itself, how shall I describe it? It was not alone that it was composed of all the ills of mortality and with a pungent, acrid smell of blood, but seemed as though corruption had become itself corrupt. Ugh! It sickens me to think of it. Every breath exhaled by that monster seemed to have clung to the place and intensified its loathsomeness. Under ordinary circumstances, such a stench would have brought our enterprise to an end, but this was no ordinary case, and the high and terrible purpose in which we were involved gave us strength which rose above merely physical considerations. After the involuntary shrinking consequent on the first nauseous whiff, we one and all set about our work as though that loathsome place were a garden of roses. We made an accurate examination of the place, the professor saying as we began. The first thing is to see how many of the boxes are left. We must then examine every hole and corner and cranny and see if we cannot get some clue as to what has become of the rest. A glance was sufficient to show how many remained, for the great earth chests were bulky and there was no mistaking them. There were only 29 left out of the 50. Once I got a fright, for seeing Lord Godalming suddenly turn and look out the vaulted door into the dark passages beyond. I lurked too, and for an instant my heart stood still. Somewhere, looking out from the shadow, I seemed to see the high lights of the Count's evil face. The ridge of the nose, the red eyes, the red lips, the awful pallor. It was only for a moment, for, as the Lord Godalming said, I thought I saw a face, but it was only the shadows, and resumed his inquiry. I turned my lamp in the direction, and stepped into the passage. There was no sign of anyone, and as there were no corners, no doors, no aperture of any kind, but only the solid walls of the passage, there could be no hiding place even for him. I took it that fear had helped imagination, and said nothing. A few minutes later, I saw Morse step suddenly back from a corner, which he was examining. We all followed his movements with our eyes, for undoubtedly some nervousness was growing on us. We saw a whole mass of phosphorescence which twinkled like stars. We all instinctively drew back. The whole place was becoming alive with rats. For a moment or two, we stood appalled, all save Lord Godalming, who was seemingly prepared for such an emergency. Rushing over to the great iron-bound oaken door, which Dr. Seward had described from the outside, and which I had seen myself, he turned the key in the lock, drew the huge bolts, and swung the door open. Then, taking his little silver whistle from his pocket, he blew a loud, shrill call. It was answered from behind Dr. Seward's house by the yelping of dogs, and after about a minute, 3 terriers came dashing round the corner of the house. Unconsciously, we had all moved towards the door, and as we moved, I noticed that the dust had been much disturbed. The boxes, which had been taken out, had been brought this way. But even in the minute that had elapsed, the number of rats had vastly increased. They seemed to swarm over the place all at once, to the lamplight shining on their moving, dark bodies and glittering, baleful eyes, made the place look like a bank of earth set with fireflies. The dogs dashed on, but at the threshold, suddenly stopped and snarled, and then, simultaneously lifting their noses, began to howl in most lugubrious fashion, whatever that means. The rats were multiplying into thousands, and we moved out. Lord Godalming lifted one of the dogs, and carrying him in, placed him on the floor. The instant his feet touched the ground, he seemed to recover his courage, and rushed at his natural enemies. They fled before him so fast that before he had shaken the life out of a score, the other dogs, who had by now been lifted in the same manner, had but small prey, or the whole mass had vanished. Are terriers the natural enemies of rats? I would have thought it would have been cats. I don't know. I'm not a dog person. With their going, it seemed as if some evil presence had departed, for the dogs frisked about and barked merrily as they made sudden darts at their prostrate foes, and turned them over and over, and tossed them in the air with vicious shakes. We all seemed to find our spirits rise. Whether it was the purifying of the deadly atmosphere by the opening of the chapel door, or the relief which we experienced by finding ourselves in the open, I know not. But most certainly, the shadow of dread seemed to slip from us like a robe. And the occasion of our coming lost something of its grim significance. Though we did not slacken a whit in our resolution, we closed the outer door and barred and locked it, and bringing the dogs with us, began our search of the house. We found nothing throughout except dust in extraordinary proportions, and all untouched save for my own footsteps when I had made my first visit. Never once did the dogs exhibit any symptom of uneasiness, and even when we returned to the chapel, they frisked about as though they had been rabbit hunting in a summer wood. Hard to take this seriously while watching a kid Sentai Henshi. Understandable. Actually, the early chapters of this were kind of hard to take seriously too, because Dracula's behavior was certifiably cute, even though he's like a hideous monster. The stuff he did was just silly and cute. And taken out of context, his actions continued to be awkward and cute. Like when he crashed his ship on the shore of England and seemed to be so embarrassed by the ordeal that he turned into a dog and ran away from the scene rather than dealing with anyone. I mean, in this context of the story, it was an evil mastermind move, sneaking on into London soil or whatever, but taken out of context, it's silly. The morning was quickening in the east when we emerged from the front. Dr. Van Helsing had taken the key off the hall door from the bunch and locked the door in orthodox fashion, putting the key into his pocket when he had done. "So far," he said, "our night has been eminently successful. No harm has come to us, such as I feared might be, and yet we have ascertained how many boxes are missing. More than all do I rejoice that this, our first, and perhaps our most difficult and dangerous step has been accomplished, without the bringing thereunto our most sweet Madame Mina, or troubling her waking or sleeping thoughts with sights and sounds and smells of horror, which she might never forget. One lesson, too, we have learned, if it be allowable to argue a particulari, that the brute beasts which are to the Count's command are yet themselves not amenable to his spiritual power. For look, these rats that would come to his call, just as from his castle top you summon the wolves to your going, to that poor mother's cry. Though they come to him, they run pell-mell from the so little dogs of my friend Arthur. We have the other matters before us, other dangers, other fears, and that monster, he has not used his power over the brute world for the last time tonight. So be it that he has gone elsewhere. Good. It has given us opportunity to cry check in some way in this chess game, which we play for the stake of human souls. And now let us go home. The dawn is close at hand, and we have reason to be content with our first night's work. It may be ordained that we have many nights and days to follow, if full of peril, but we must go on, and from no danger shall we shrink." The house was silent when we got back, save for some poor creature who was screaming away in one of the distant wards, and a low, moaning sound from Renfield's room. The poor wretch was doubtless torturing himself, after the manner of the insane, with needless thoughts of pain. I came tiptoe into our own room and found Mina asleep, breathing so softly that I had to put my ear down to hear it. She looks paler than usual. I hope the meeting tonight has not upset her. I am truly thankful that she is to be left out of our future work, and even of our deliberations. It is too great a strain for a woman to bear. Rude. And I did not think so at first, but I know better now. Therefore, I am glad that it is settled. There may be things which would frighten her to hear, and yet to conceal them from her might be worse than to tell her once she suspected there was any concealment. Henceforth, our work is to be a sealed book to her, till at least such a time as we can tell her that all is finished. And the earth free from a monster of the netherworld. I dare say it will be difficult to begin to keep silence after such confidence as ours, but I must be resolute, and tomorrow I shall keep dark over tonight's doings, and shall refuse to speak of anything that has happened. I rest on the sofa, so as not to disturb her. First of October, later the same day. I suppose it was natural that we should have all overslept ourselves, for the day was a busy one, and the night had no rest at all. Even Mina must have felt its exhaustion, for though I slept till the sun was high, I was awake before her, and had to call 2 or 3 times before she awoke. Indeed, she was so sound asleep that for a few seconds she did not recognize me, but looked at me with a sort of blank terror, as one who has been waked out of a bad dream. She complained a little of being tired. I let her rest till later in the day. We now know of 21 boxes having been removed, and if it be that several were taken in any of these removals, we may be able to trace them all. Such will, of course, immensely simplify our labor, and the sooner the matter is attended to, the better. I shall look up Thomas Snelling today. All good, enjoyer. Dr. Seward's diary. Also the same day, the 1st of October. It was towards noon when I was awakened by the professor walking into my room. He was more jolly and cheerful than usual, and it is quite evident that last night's work has helped to take some of the brooding weight off his mind. After going over the adventure of the night, he suddenly said, "Yeah, it is, Professor. Your patient interests me much. May it be that with you, why does he have to talk so weird? May it be that with you I visit him this morning, or if that you are too occupied, I can go alone if it may be. It is a new experience to me to find a lunatic who talk philosophy and reason so sound. I had some work to do, which pressed, so I told him that if he would go alone, I would be glad, as then I should not have to keep him waiting. So I called an attendant and gave him the necessary instructions. Before the professor left the room, I cautioned him against getting any false impression from my patient. But, he answered, I want him to talk of himself and of his delusion as to the consuming of live things. He said to Madame Mina, as I see in your diary of yesterday, that he had once had such a belief. But why do you smile, friend John?" Hey, alright, anime. Hope you're having a good day. I'm doing fantastic. We're reading Dracula. Excuse me, I said, but the answer is here. I laid my hand on the typewritten matter. When our sane and learned lunatic made the very statement of how he used to consume life, his mouth was actually nauseous with the flies and spiders which he had eaten just before Mrs. Harker entered the room. Van Helsing smiled in turn. Good, he said. Your memory is true, friend John. I should have remembered, and yet it is very obliquity of thought and memory which makes mental disease such a fascinating study. Perhaps I may gain more knowledge out of the folly of this bad man than I shall from the teaching of the most wise. Who knows? I went on with my work, and before long was through that in hand. It seemed that the time had been very short indeed, but there was Van Helsing back in the study. Do I interrupt? He asked politely as he stood at the door. Not at all, I answered. Come in. My work is finished, and I am free. I can go with you now, if you'd like. It is needless. I have seen him. Well, I fear that he does not appraise me at much. Our interview is short. When I entered the room, he was sitting on a stool in the center, with his elbows on his knees, and his face was the picture of sullen discontent. I spoke to him as cheerfully as I could, and with such a measure of respect as I could assume. He made no reply whatever. "Don't you know me?" I asked. His answer was not reassuring. "I know you well enough. You are the old fool Van Helsing. I wish you would take yourself and your idiotic brain theories somewhere else. Damn old thick-headed Dutchman." Rude. Not a word more would he say, but sat in his implacable sullenness, as indifferent to me as though I had not been in the room at all. Thus departed for this time my chance of much learning from the so clever lunatic. So I shall go, if I may, and cheer myself with a few happy words with that sweet soul Madame Mina. Friend John, it does rejoice me unspeakable that she is no more to be pained, no more to be worried with her terrible things. Though we shall much miss her help. It is better so. The author is really laying on the foreshadowing thick here. "I agree with you with all my heart," I answered earnestly, for I did not want him to weaken in this matter. "Mrs. Harker is better out of it. Things are quite bad enough for us, all men of the world, and who have been in many tight places in our time. But it is no place for a woman." Rude. "And if she had remained in touch with the affair, it would be in time infallibly have wrecked her. So Van Helsing has gone to confer with Mrs. Harker and Harker. Quincy and Art are all out following up the clues as to the earth boxes. I shall finish my round of work, and we shall meet tonight." Now for Amina Harker's journal, the lady herself. Same day, the 1st of October. It is strange to me to be kept in the dark as I am today, after Jonathan's full confidence for so many years, to see him manifestly avoid certain matters, and those the most vital of all. This morning I slept late after the fatigues of yesterday, and though Jonathan was late too, he was the earlier. He spoke to me before he went out, never more sweetly or tenderly, but he never mentioned a word of what had happened in the visit to the Count's house, and yet he must have known how terribly anxious I was. Poor dear fellow. I suppose it must have distressed him even more than it did me. They all agreed that it was best that I should not be drawn further into this awful work, and I acquiesced. But to think that he keeps anything from me. And now I am crying like a silly fool, when I know it comes from my husband's great love and from the good wishes of those other strong men. That has done me good. Well, someday Jonathan will tell me all, unless it should ever be that he should think for a moment that I kept anything from him. I still keep my journal as usual. Then, if he has feared of my trust, I shall show it to him, with every thought of my heart put down for his dear eyes to read. I feel strangely sad and low-spirited today. I suppose it is the reaction from the terrible excitement. Last night, I went to bed when the men had gone, simply because they told me to. I didn't feel sleepy, and I did feel full of devouring anxiety. I kept thinking over everything that has been ever since Jonathan came to see me in London, and it all seems like a horrible tragedy, with fate pressing on relentlessly to some destined end. Everything that one does seems. I don't know why that trouble parsing that. No matter how right it may be, to bring on the very thing which is most to be deplored. If I hadn't gone to Whitby, perhaps poor dear Lucy would be with us now. She hadn't taken the visiting the churchyard till I came, and if she hadn't come there in the daytime with me, she wouldn't have walked there in her sleep. And if she hadn't gone there at night and asleep, that monster couldn't have destroyed her as he did. Oh, why did I ever go to Whitby? There now, crying again. I wonder what has come over me today. I must hide it from Jonathan. For if he knew that I had been crying twice in one morning, I, who never cried on my own account, and whom he has never caused to shed a tear, the dear fellow would fret his heart out. I shall put a bold face on, and if I do feel weepy, he shall never see it. I suppose it is one of the lessons that we poor women have to learn. written in a different time. I can't quite remember how I fell asleep last night. I remember hearing the sudden barking of the dogs and a lot of queer sounds, like praying on a very tumultuous scale, from Mr. Renfield's room, which is somewhere under this. And then there was silence over everything, silence so profound that it startled me, and I got up and looked out of the window. All was dark and silent, the black shadows thrown by the moonlight seeming full of a silent mystery of their own. Not a thing seemed to be stirring, but all to be grim and fixed as death or fate, so that a thin streak of white mist that crept with almost imperceptible slowness across the grass towards the house seemed to have a sentience and a vitality of its own. I think that the digression of my thoughts must have done me good, for when I got back to bed, I found a lethargy creeping over me. I lay a while, but could not quite sleep, so I got out and looked out of the window again. The mist was spreading, and was now close up to the house, so that I could see it lying thick against the wall, as though it were stealing up to the windows. The poor man was more loud than ever, and though I could not distinguish a word he said, I could in some way recognize his tones, some passionate entreaty on his part. Then there was the sound of a struggle, and I knew that the attendants were dealing with him. I was so frightened that I crept into bed and pulled the cloth over my head, putting my fingers in my ears. I was not then a bit sleepy, at least so I thought, but I must have fallen asleep, for except dreams, I do not remember anything until morning, when Jonathan woke me. I think that it took me an effort and a little time to realize where I was, that it was Jonathan who was bending over me. My dream was very peculiar, and was almost typical of the way that waking thoughts become merged in, or continued in, dreams. The book you mentioned, Why Do Men Have Nipples? I feel like I've heard of that one before, but I don't remember what it was about. I thought that I was asleep, and waiting for Jonathan to come back. I was very anxious about him, and I was powerless to act. My feet, and my hands, and my brain were weighted so that nothing could proceed at the usual pace. And so I slept uneasily and thought. Then it began to dawn upon me that the air was heavy and dank and cold. I put back all the clothes from my face and found, to my surprise, that all was dim around. The gaslight which I had left lit for Jonathan, but turned down, came only like a tiny red spark through the fog, which had evidently grown thicker and poured into the room. Then it occurred to me that I had shut the window before I had come to bed. I would have got out to make certain on the point, but some leaden lethargy seemed to chain my limbs and even my will. I lay still and endured. That was all. I closed my eyes, but could still see through my eyelids. It is wonderful what tricks our dreams play on us, and how conveniently we can imagine. The mist grew thicker and thicker, and I could see now how it came in, for I could see it like smoke, or with the white energy of boiling water pouring in, not through the window, but through the joinings of the door. They got thicker and thicker, till it seemed as if it became concentrated into a sort of pillar of cloud in the room, through the top of which I could see the light of the gas shining like a red eye. Things began to whirl through my brain just as the cloudy column was now whirling in the room, and through it all came the scriptural words, "A pillar of cloud by day and a fire by night." Was it indeed some spiritual guidance that was coming to me in my sleep? But the pillar was composed of both the day and the night guiding, for the fire was in the red eye, which at the thought got a new fascination for me. Till, as I looked, the fire divided and seemed to shine on me through the fog like two red eyes, such as Lucy told me of in her momentary mental wandering when, on the cliff, the dying sunlight struck the windows of St. Mary's Church. Suddenly, the horror burst upon me that it was thus that Jonathan had seen those awful women growing into reality through the whirling mist in the moonlight, and in my dream I must have fainted, for all became black darkness. The last conscious effort which imagination made was to show me a livid white face bending over me out of the mist. I must be careful of such dreams, for they would unseat one's reason if there were too much of them. I would get Dr. Van Helsing or Dr. Seward to prescribe something for me, which would make me sleep, only that I fear to alarm them. Such a dream, at the present time, would become woven into their fears for me. Tonight, I shall strive hard to sleep naturally. If I do not, I shall tomorrow night get them to give me a dose of chloral. That cannot hurt me for once, and it will give me a good night's sleep. Last night tired me more than if I had not slept at all. She totally got by Dracula. Good tea today. 2nd of October, the next day at 10 p.m. More Mina. Last night I slept, but did not dream. I must have slept soundly, for I was not waked by Jonathan coming to bed. But the sleep has not refreshed me. For today I feel terribly weak and spiritless. I spent all yesterday trying to read, or lying down dozing. In the afternoon, Mr. Rainfield asked if he might see me. Poor man, he was very gentle. And when I came away, he kissed my hand and bade God bless me. Some way, it affected me much. I am crying when I think of him. This is a new weakness, of which I must be careful. Jonathan would be miserable if he knew I had been crying. He and the others were out till dinner time, and they all came in tired. I did what I could to brighten them up, and I suppose that the effort did me good, for I forgot how tired I was. After dinner, they sent me to bed, and all went off to smoke together, as they said, but I knew that they wanted to tell each other of what had occurred to each during the day. I could see from Jonathan's manner that he had something important to communicate. I was not so sleepy as I should have been, so before they went, I asked Dr. Seward to give me a little opiate of some kind. Gotta get him hooked, as I had not slept well the night before. He very kindly made me up a sleeping draught, which he gave to me, telling me that it would do me no harm, as it was very mild. I have taken it, and am waiting for sleep, which still keeps aloof. I hope I have not done wrong, for as sleep begins to flirt with me, a new fear comes, that I may have been foolish and thus depriving myself the power of waking. I might want it. Here comes sleep. Good night. Oh, next chapter. We'll keep going. I have 15 minutes left. Chapter 20, returning to Jonathan Harker, not Hawker. 1st of October, going back to the previous day, in the evening. I found Thomas Snelling in his house at Bethnal Green, but unhappily, he was not in a condition to remember anything. The very prospect of beer, which my expecting coming had opened to him, had proved too much, and he had begun too early on his expected debauch. I learned, however, from his wife, who seemed a decent, poor soul, that he was only the assistant to Smollett, who of the two mates was the responsible person. So off I drove to Walworth, and found Mr. Joseph Smollett at home and in his shirt sleeves, taking a late tea out of a saucer. He is a decent, intelligent fellow, distinctly a good, reliable type of a workman, and with a headpiece of his own. He remembered all about the incident of the boxes, and from a wonderful dog-eared notebook, which he produced from some mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers, and which had hieroglyphical entries in thick, half-obliterated pencil. He gave me the destinations of the boxes. There were, he said, 6 in the cartload, which he took from Carfax and left at 197 Chicksand Street, Mile End, Newtown, and another 6 which he deposited at Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. Oh, Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. I thought that was the next sentence. If then the Count meant to scatter these ghastly refuges of his over London, these places were chosen as the first of delivery, so that later he might distribute more fully. The systematic manner in which this was done made me think that he could not mean to confine himself to 2 sides of London. He was now fixed on the far east of the northern shore, on the east of the southern shore, and on the south. The north and west were surely never meant to be left out of this diabolical scheme, let alone the city itself, in the very heart of fashionable London in the southwest and west. I went back to Smollett and asked him if he could tell us if any other boxes had been taken from Carfax. He replied, "Well, governor, he treated me wearying and some. I had given him half a sovereign. And I'll tell you all I know. I heard a man by the name Bloxham say 4 nights ago in this air and hounds in Pincher's Alley as how his mate had a rare dusty job in an old house up perfect. There ain't a many such jobs as this here. And I'm thinking that maybe Sam Bloxham could tell you something." I asked if he could tell me where to find him. I told him that if he could get me the address, it would be worth another half sovereign to him. So he gulped down the rest of his tea and stood up, saying that he was going to begin the search then and there. At the door he stopped and said, while I take a sip, "Look here, governor. There ain't no sense in me a keeping you here. You may find Sam soon, or I mayn't. But anyhow, he ain't like to be in a way to tell you much tonight. Sam is a rare one when he starts on the booze. If you can give me an envelope with a stamp on it and put your address on it, I'll find out where Sam is to be found and post it to you tonight. But you'd better be up arter soon in the morning. Folksy writing. Or maybe you won't catch him, for Sam gets off main early. Never mind the booze the night before." This was all practical, so one of the children went off with a penny to buy an envelope and a sheet of paper, and to keep the change. When she came back, I addressed the envelope and stamped it, and when Smollett had again faithfully promised to post the address when he found, I took my way to home. We're on the track anyhow. I am tired tonight and want sleep. Mina is fast asleep and looks a little too pale. Her eyes look as though she had been crying. Poor dear. I have no doubts it frets her to be kept in the dark, and it may make her doubly anxious about me and the others. It is best as it is. It is better to be disappointed and worried in such a way now than to have her nerve broken. The doctors were quite right to insist on her being kept out of this dreadful business. I must be firm, for on me this particular burden of silence must rest. I shall not ever enter on the subject with her under any circumstances. Indeed, it may not be a hard task, after all, for she herself has become reticent on the subject and has not spoken of the Count or his doings ever since we told her of our decision. The next day, the 2nd of October in the evening. A long and trying and exciting day. By the first post, I got my directed envelope with a dirty scrap of paper enclosed, on which was written with a carpenter's pencil in a sprawling hand. Sam Bloxham, Corcoran's, 4, Potter's Court, Bartle Street, Walworth, Arsk for the Depite. Whatever Depite is. I got the letter in bed and rose without making Mina. She looked heavy and sleepy and pale, and far from well. I determined not to wake her, but that, when I should return from this new search, I would arrange for her going back to Exeter. I think she would be happier in her own home, with her daily tasks to interest her, than in being here amongst us and in ignorance. I only saw Dr. Seward for a moment, and told him where I was off to, promising to come back and tell the rest so soon as I should have found out anything. I drove to Walworth and found with some difficulty Potter's Court. Mr. Smollett's spelling misled me, as I asked for Potter's Court instead of Potter's Court. However, when I had found the court, I had no difficulty in discovering Corcoran's lodging house. When I asked the man who came to the door for the Depite, he shook his head and said, "I don't know him. There ain't no such person here. Never heard him all my bloomin' days. Don't believe there ain't nobody of that kind living here anywheres. I took out Smollett's letter, and as I read it, it seemed to me that the lesson of the spelling of the name of the court might guide me. What are you? I asked. I'm the deputy. Oh, deputy. Got it. He answered. I saw at once that I was on the right track. Phonetic spelling had again misled me. A half-crown tip put the deputy's knowledge at my disposal, and I learned that Mr. Bloxam, who had slept off the remains of his beer on the previous night at Corcoran's, had left for his work at Poplar at 5 in the morning. He could not tell me where the place of work was situated, but he had a vague idea that it was some kind of newfangled warehouse. And with this slender clue, I had to start for Poplar. It was 12 o'clock before I got any satisfactory hint of such a building. And this I got at a coffee shop, where some workmen were having their dinner. One of these suggested that there was being erected at Cross Angel Street a new cold storage building. And as this suited the condition of a newfangled warehouse, I at once drove to it. An interview with a surly gatekeeper and a surlier foreman, both of whom were appeased with a coin of the realm, put me on the track of Bloxam. He was sent for on my suggesting that I was willing to pay his day's wages to the foreman for the privilege of asking him a few questions on the private matter. He was a smart enough fellow, though rough of speech and bearing. When I had promised to pay for his information and given him an earnest, he told me he had made 2 journeys between Carfax and a house in Piccadilly, and had taken from this house to the latter 9 great boxes, main heavy ones, with a horse and cart hired by him for this purpose. I asked him if he could tell me the number of the house in Piccadilly, to which he replied, "Well, governor, I forgets the number, but it was only a kind doors from Big White Church, or something of the kind. Not long built. It was dusty old house too, though nothing to the dustiness of the house we took the blue in boxes from." How did you get into the houses if they were both empty? There was the old party what engaged me in the house at Purfleet. He yelped me to lift the boxes and put them in the dray. Curse me, but he was the strongest chap I ever struck. And him and an old fellow with a white moustache, one that think you would keep from going to shatter. Whatever he just said. How this phrase thrilled through me. I think they're talking about Dracula here. Why, he took up his end of the boxes like they was pounds of tea, and me a huffing and blowing for I could upend mine anyhow, and I'm no chicken neither. How did you get into the house in Piccadilly? I asked. He was there too. He must have started off and got there for me, for when I rung the bell, was Kim an open door, issued. Door himself, and helped me to carry boxes into the hall. The whole 9? I asked. Yes. There was 5 in the first load and 4 in the second. It was the main dry work. I don't so well remember how I got home. I interrupted him. Were the boxes left in the hall? Yes. It was a big hall, and there was nothing else in it. I made one more attempt to further matters. You didn't have any key. Never used no key nor nothing. Oh, gent, he opened the door himself and shut it again when I drove off. And don't remember last time, but that was the beer. And you can't remember the number of the house. No, sir, but you needn't have no difficulty about that. It's an iron with a stone front with a bow on it, and I steps up the door. I know them steps, and I had to carry the boxes up with 3 loafers what came around to earn a copper. Ogen gives them shillings, and that seeing they got so much they wanted more. But he took one of them by the shoulder, and was like to throw him down the steps. A lot of them went away cussing. I thought that with this description, I could find the house. So, having paid my friend for his information, I started off for Piccadilly. I had gained a new painful experience. The Count could, it was evident, handle the earth boxes himself. If so, time was precious, for now that he had achieved a certain amount of distribution, he could, by choosing his own time, complete the task unobserved. At Piccadilly Circus, I discharged my cab and walked westward, Beyond the junior constitutional, I came across the house described, and was satisfied that this was the next of the layers arranged by Dracula. The house looked as though it had been long untenanted. The windows were encrusted with dust, and the shutters were up. All the framework was black with time, and from the iron, the paint had mostly scaled away. It was evident that up to lately, there had been a large notice board in front of the balcony. It had, however, been roughly torn away, the uprights which had supported it still remaining. Behind the rails of the balcony, I saw there were some loose boards whose raw edges looked white. I would have given a good deal to have been able to see the notice board intact, as it would perhaps given some clue to the ownership of the house. I remembered my experience of the investigation and purchase of Carfax, and I could not but feel that if I could find the former owner there might be some means discovered of gaining access to the house. There was at present nothing to be learned from the Piccadilly side, and nothing could be done, so I went round to the back to see if anything could be gathered from this quarter. The mews were active, the Piccadilly houses being mostly in occupation. I asked one or two of the grooms and helpers whom I saw around if they could tell me anything of the empty house. One of them said that he heard it had lately been taken, but he couldn't say from whom stiff. He told me, however, that up to very lately there had been a notice board of for sale up, and that perhaps Mitchell, Sons and Candy, the house agents, could tell me something, as he thought he remembered seeing the name of that firm on the board. I did not wish to seem too eager, or to let my informant know or guess too much, so thanking him in the usual manner, I strolled away. It was now growing dusk, and the autumn night was closing in, so I did not lose any time. Having learned the address of Mitchell, Sons and Candy from a directory at the Berkeley, I was soon at their office in Sackville Street. The gentleman who saw me was particularly suave in manner, but uncommunicative in equal proportion, having once told me that the Piccadilly house, which throughout our interview he called a mansion, was sold. He considered my business as concluded. When I asked who had purchased it, he opened his eyes a thought wider, and paused a few seconds before replying. "It is sold, sir." "Pardon me," I said with equal politeness, "but I have a special reason for wishing to know who purchased it." Again, he paused longer, and raised his eyebrows still more. "It is sold, sir," was again his laconic reply. "Surely," I said, "you do not mind letting me know so much." "But I do mind," he answered. "The affairs of their clients are absolutely safe in the hands of Mitchell, Sons and Candy." This was manifestly a prig of the first water. There was no use arguing with him. I thought I had best meet him on his own ground, so I said, "Your clients, sir, are happy in having so resolute a guardian of their confidence. I am myself a professional man." I handed him my card. In this instance, I am not prompted by curiosity. I act on the part of a Lord Godalming who wishes to know something of the property, which was, he understood, lately for sale. These words put a different complexion on affairs. He said, "I would like to oblige you if I could, Mr. Harker, and especially would I like to oblige his lordship. We once carried out a small matter of renting some chambers for him, when he was the Honorable Arthur Homewood. If you will let me have his lordship's address, I will consult the house on the subject, and I will in any case communicate with his lordship by tonight's post. It will be a pleasure if we can so far deviate from our rules as to give the required information to his lordship." I wanted to secure a friend and not make an enemy, so I thanked him and gave the address at Dr. Seward's and came away. It was now dark, and I was tired and hungry. I got a cup of tea at the Aerated Bread Company and came down to Purfleet by the next train. Okay, this keeps going. It is 2:30, so that is going to be it for me tonight. Tomorrow, continuing with more Dracula. Kept changing my schedule today after I posted it. Today Dracula, Tuesday tomorrow more Dracula, Wednesday day after tomorrow I will be doing a solo stream of Phasmophobia, where I am going to be terrified and horrified at trying to solo that game because I'm bad at scary stuff. And then Thursday will be playing Viscera for Halloween special stream. And Friday night I will be playing Helldivers 2 with the captain again, and probably some other people, but we'll see. But I will see everyone tomorrow at 1:30 a.m. Eastern for more Dracula. Hope everyone has a fantastic Tuesday. Thanks for joining in, everyone.